ये सरजमीन है तेरी, तू इसका निगहबान है। कलेजा तुझ में, जीता तूने आसमान।
The third dimension has always fascinated us, the human race. But this dream took wings for the first time when the Wright brothers took their flying machine for a maiden flight in the early 1900s. Aviation grew rapidly. The first aeroplane soared in the Indian skies in December 1910. 7 years after the maiden flight by the Wright brothers. The journey of the Indian Air Force has been a very fascinating one. 75 years ago, a very small band of Indian pilots and airmen set out against many odds to learn to fly and form an air force. The British Imperial government had denied India an air force till this point, despite the success with which Indians had flown in the First World War. The early years were difficult, not because the pioneers were less proficient than their RAF counterpart, but owing to the prejudices that they had to overcome. Through history, it is zone of adversity, the best in man is challenged. A handful of Wapiti Westland aircraft marked the beginning days of the Indian Air Force, which saw few resources. In these times, the Air Force pilots flew with raw passion and courage, a tradition for which the Indian Air Force is now known. The Indian Air Force proved its mettle over the northwest frontier and more dramatically in the Second World War. In the history of man, there has probably never been a grimmer period when millions of innocents were killed as fascism spread. Few stood firm against this wrong. The Indian Air Force played an instrumental role in advance of the Japanese Army in Burma and northern Thailand, winning much accolade for their efforts. As the war progressed, the British started to realize the true potential of the Indian Air Force, and suddenly relatively modern aircraft found their place in the squadrons at the front, manned by the best pilots. This war brought laurels to young Indian Air Force combatants, their valor aptly acknowledged by conferring 23 gallantry awards and later bestowing the prefix Royal upon the Indian Air Force on 12th March 1945. While India was going through the painful period of partition, the Indian Air Force's air warriors were given the task of saving the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Thousands of armed men and tribesmen from Pakistan, under cover of machine gun fire, slaughtering all habitation and pillaging houses, crossed the Indian borders. In their sights, Srinagar, the capital of Jammu and Kashmir, was a few days away. The instrument of accession was signed. The Indian Air Force airlifted the 1st Battalion of the Sikh Regiment, thus securing the airfield safety. The operations of 47-48 were unique and saw for the first time full-time deployment of transport aircraft. The Indian Army single-handedly blocked the advance of the tribal warriors and the Pakistani mercenaries. In Poonch area, despite all the difficulties and against heavy odds, Air Commodore Meher Singh created a sort of record by landing at Dakota with 3 tons of load against normal rated load of 1 ton. In a span of 6 days, number 12 Squadron, Royal Indian Air Force carried out 73 sorties, averaging more than 2 sorties per aircraft per day, carrying more than 210 tons of supplies to Poonch. Apart from airlifting operations and supplying essential